The sky rips apart. A multi-million-dollar Patriot missile battery violently erupts, sending a blinding pillar of fire into the night. The radar screams in absolute panic. Intercup this roar with a sound that freezes the blood. A slow, agonizingly steady buzz, like a lawnmower hovering just out of sight. That is the Shahid 136. A hyper-advanced defense grid is frantically hurling $3 million interceptors to stop a fiberglass triangle held together by commercial screws. Look at this burning math. It is breaking down right in front of your eyes. If you think oceans, fortified borders, or the sheer size of the United States military budget protects you, you are living in a ghost world. Right now, a weapon that costs less than a used sedan bypasses the most sophisticated radar grids on Earth. Ignorance of this asymmetric reality is a luxury you can no longer afford. The front line is no longer a physical place. It is everywhere. Over the next hour, I am taking you on a tense, ground-level investigation. We are stepping from the smoking impact craters of these front lines straight into the impenetrable rock of the Zagros Mountains. You will get the ultimate open-source intelligence playbook. This is the optic you need to see the modern battlefield for what it truly is: a raw, terrifying equation of cost, code, and shadow supply chains. It is an advantage that will permanently change how you view global news. The siren wails in the distance, a long morning pitch cutting through the cold night air. I'm standing at the edge of a charred crater, chewed right out of an urban center. The asphalt is still smoking, radiating a sick chemical heat. In my hand, I hold a jagged piece of carbon fiber. The serial number is hastily scratched off, but the engineering is unmistakable. The camera tilts up to an empty, terrifyingly quiet sky. The swarm was here, and it left a bleeding hole in the city. The correspondent's eyes track the destruction, but the mind sees only a terrifying ledger. A single interceptor from a Patriot Advanced Capability 3 system costs roughly $4.1 million. That is the price of keeping the sky clean for a fraction of a second. But the piece of debris I am holding? The estimated production cost of one loitering munition, manufactured deep underground, is merely $30,000 to $50,000. The discrepancy is a death sentence. You cannot fight this with conventional logic. When a target costs less than the fuel required to scramble a fighter jet, the economic gravity of war reverses. The enemy knows this. They are not trying to penetrate the armor. They are trying to break the bank. Every time a $4.1 million missile obliterates a $30,000 drone, the attacker wins. They trade cheap plastic for our most critical, expensive assets, bleeding the treasury dry, one explosion at a time. This brings us to the nightmare scenario, the saturation strike. The attacker does not send one drone. They deploy dozens of these cheap, expendable assets simultaneously. They flood the airspace, deliberately triggering the automated defense systems to fire back. The algorithms see multiple incoming threats and do what they were programmed to do: empty their magazines in minutes. A multi-billion-dollar shield is stripped away, leaving the city totally exposed for the next wave. We are witnessing a fundamental collapse of military theory. This is no longer a battle of explosives or tactical genius. It is a brutal, mathematical battle of burn rates. The defender runs out of money and interceptors long before the attacker runs out of fiberglass and commercial electronics. The correspondent looks down at the ash. You realize the sheer economic absurdity of this conflict. It is an enemy that actively bleeds your wallet completely dry before it ever bleeds your soldiers. The adrenaline mixes with a sickening exhaustion. You stand in the crater and feel the primal, visceral tension of knowing the sky is still watching. The silence overhead is a lie. The radar operators sitting in bunkers miles away are sweating, watching their screens, knowing they just spent a fortune to intercept a threat built from the same components found in a remote-controlled toy. They survived tonight, but the math guarantees they cannot survive tomorrow. The countdown is running. Look at the debris again. Feel the jagged edges. It lacks the sleek titanium perfection of Western defense contracting. It is ugly, it is raw, and it is relentlessly effective. By shifting the battlefield from high-tech dogfights to low-end mass production, a shadow network has bypassed 80 years of aerospace dominance. They turned our reliance on hyper-advanced, expensive systems into our greatest vulnerability. The heavier the armor, the faster it sinks into this new reality. The air raid sirens finally die down, but the echo remains in your chest. Tomorrow night, the swarm will return, and they will launch another volley of cheap plastic, forcing us to fire another volley of liquid gold. You cannot arrest a drone. You cannot sanction a piece of fiberglass. You can only watch the collision of two completely different centuries of warfare. One side operates with surgical precision, while the other side weaponizes the sheer, overwhelming force of scale. We are trapped in a feedback loop of our own sophisticated engineering. Every time the sirens wail, a civilization pays the ransom. But the real terror is not the drone itself. It is the invisible machine that feeds this endless swarm. The ghost factories churning these weapons out by the thousands, immune to our sanctions, and hidden from our satellites. To understand how we break this cycle, we have to look away from the empty sky and stare directly into the dark, churning source. This brings us to the ultimate asymmetric equation. The most dangerous weapon on Earth is no longer a nuclear warhead. It is a hacked supply chain. It forces us to ask a question that defense ministers are terrified to answer in public. How do you bankrupt a modern empire? You do not need a massive army. You simply force them, night after night, to shoot down a $40,000 target with a $3 million missile. The trap is set. Now, we follow the carbon fiber back to the nest. We must trace the origin of that charred carbon fiber found in the crater back to its impregnable birthplace. I leave the smoking ruins and step into the humming chill of a windowless intelligence bunker. This is the new front line. A sterile blue glow washes over scattered satellite topography prints. The air in here is thick with a different kind of panic. The cold thrill of the hunt mixes with rising paranoia. The analyst beside me stares at a high-resolution satellite feed. We are locked onto a sheer cliff face in the Middle East. The target is the Zagros mountain range. He taps the screen, tracking heavy tire tracks that simply vanish into the solid rock. Then, he switches to the thermal overlay. The screen bleeds neon crimson. Massive heat blooms are venting from disguised crevices in the stone. The mountain is breathing. It is exhaling the exhaust of heavy industry. You are looking at a living nightmare. What happens when the factory producing the apocalypse is buried under a mountain too deep for your biggest bombs? We know exactly where the enemy is. We can watch them load the trucks, but we cannot touch them. The armor protecting this facility was forged millions of years ago. To understand this threat, look at the rock itself. The Zagros mountain range consists of rugged limestone and dolomite. This is not just dirt and stone. This geological composition provides natural tectonic shielding. It actively absorbs and disrupts seismic penetration. If you drop a bomb here, the mountain simply swallows the shockwave. Geology has become the ultimate strategic armor. The analyst pulls up archived data. We are looking at classified satellite telemetry from 2024. The images show relentless excavation. We watch the tunneling operations plunging more than 300 feet deep into solid bedrock. That depth is not arbitrary. It is a calculated mathematical middle finger to Western air supremacy. The builders knew exactly what we would throw at them. Going 300 feet into dolomite places the target in a completely different category of warfare. It far exceeds the blast radius of standard penetrating munitions. You cannot dig them out with standard airstrikes. The rock protects the assembly lines like a vault. Every day, the tunnel goes deeper, and the thermal blooms burn hotter. The swarm is multiplying in the dark, perfectly safe. You might think we have a weapon for this. You think of the United States military's most powerful conventional bunker buster, the massive ordnance penetrator, a terrifying piece of engineering that weighs 30,000 pounds. It is designed to fall from the sky like a meteor and shatter subterranean fortresses. The analyst brings up the specifications of our ultimate weapon. But then, you do the math. The massive ordnance penetrator effectively penetrates only up to 200 feet of reinforced concrete. The drone factory sits at least 300 feet deep in solid limestone. We are short by 100 feet of impenetrable rock. The ultimate weapon is useless here. This renders these deep facilities mathematically untouchable. The bunker buster becomes an expensive paperweight. We are watching a superpower realize its own limitations in real time. The analyst leans back, rubbing his eyes. The claustrophobia in this bunker spikes. They are building the weapons faster than we can map the tunnels, and they are doing it with total impunity. You can feel the frustration radiating off the screens. We have the intelligence, but we lack the physics to act on it. This is not a mere storage facility. It is a subterranean city of war. These deep rock caverns house entirely self-contained production lines. We are talking about raw materials going in and finished killing machines coming out. They handle everything from chassis molding to the final arming of the warheads, completely out of sight. The entire life cycle of a nightmare, sealed beneath the earth. Because they operate entirely underground, they are completely off the grid. You cannot cut their power lines, you cannot disrupt their water supply, and the thick layers of dolomite provide one more chilling advantage. They are protected from electromagnetic pulse attacks. You could detonate an atmospheric weapon overhead, and the assembly lines would not even flicker. The conveyor belts keep rolling. The drones are stacked, fueled, and programmed in absolute isolation. We are staring at the perfect incubator for asymmetric warfare, a factory that cannot be bombed, starved, or shut down. Every thermal bloom on that satellite map represents another swarm preparing to launch. We are watching the countdown clock to the next blackout. We found the impregnable source of the swarm. But discovering this fortress only deepens the crisis. We cannot destroy the mountain, and we cannot afford to shoot down every fiberglass triangle they launch. So, we have to look closer at the threat. If we cannot break the factory, we must dissect the weapon itself. We have to open up the beast, tear through the carbon fiber, and look at its digital heart. Since we cannot bomb the mountain, we must surgically dissect the weapon itself to find its weakness. I'm standing in a makeshift forensic lab miles from the front. The air is thick with the stench of burnt electronics and raw aviation fuel. I am laying out the shattered guts of a captured drone on a plastic tarp. We need to look at its digital heart. You expect to find classified technology inside a machine that brought a superpower to its knees. You look for encrypted military-grade hardware, restricted alloys, the fingerprints of a state-sponsored defense contractor. But this is Frankenstein's monster. The terrifying truth is staring right at us under the harsh glare of a tactical flashlight. The most devastating weapon of the decade contains absolutely zero classified military hardware. Forensic teardowns of these downed, loitering munitions tell a sick, undeniable story. I shine the beam across the scarred chassis, illuminating the internal architecture. Over 80% of the components inside this lethal strike vehicle are entirely dual-use commercial off-the-shelf electronics. This is not a bespoke weapon of war. It is an assemblage of civilian parts, violently repurposed to deliver high explosives. This realization changes the entire calculus of the battlefield. Dual use means these parts are completely legal to manufacture, sell, and ship across international borders. They are designed for weather stations, industrial automation, and consumer gadgets. When you strip away the fiberglass shell, you are looking at the same micro-components sitting in your own living room right now. The threat is intimately domestic. The drone's propulsion system sits at the center of the top, dripping dark oil onto the plastic. It is a crude, brutally simple piece of engineering. This is the source of that agonizingly slow, lawnmower-like sound that haunts the trenches at night. You assume a weapon that outruns advanced radar nets requires a high-performance turbine. The reality is far more insulting to $1 trillion defense budget. The primary engine driving the Shahid 136, designated as the MD-550, is not a military secret. It is a direct, reverse-engineered clone of a German civilian engine, and it was not designed to power a long-range cruise missile. It was originally built for large, recreational model airplanes. A hobbyist's engine, easily obtained, flipped into a relentless delivery system for a 50-pound fragmentation warhead. Let that sink in. The drone that bypasses $3 million Patriot interceptors is powered by the same mechanical heart meant for Sunday afternoon flying clubs. The acoustics of that engine, the very sound that triggers air raid sirens and sends millions rushing to bomb shelters, is the mechanical stutter of a modified toy. The adversary weaponized the mundane. They weaponized absolute accessibility. But the engine only provides the muscle. The true danger lies in the brain of the machine. I run my gloved fingers over the flight control unit, wiping away a layer of soot. This is the command center that processes the GPS signals, calculates the wind resistance, and guides the warhead to a precise coordinate with terrifying accuracy. I lean in, reading the microscopic serial numbers etched into the silicon. There is no proprietary defense code here. The entire flight control unit relies on mass-produced microprocessors. These are the exact same chips you can purchase in bulk on global e-commerce platforms right now. They cost less than $20 apiece. For the price of a cheap lunch, the engineers acquired the computational power necessary to navigate a lethal drone across hundreds of miles of hostile airspace. A $20 chip outsmarting a billion-dollar radar grid. This is the brutal asymmetry of modern warfare laid bare on a dirty tarp. The barrier to entry for precision-guided munitions has collapsed to zero. You do not need a decade of research and development. You just need a credit card and an internet connection. The democratization of destruction is fully realized in this scorched piece of silicon. For decades, Western powers believed they could control the spread of advanced weapons through legislation. They built massive bureaucratic walls, strict export controls, crushing economic sanctions, international arms embargoes. The assumption was that rogue states would simply starve for the technology needed to build modern arsenals. Looking at these scattered parts, you realize that assumption is dead. By relying entirely on unregulated civilian microelectronics, the adversary completely bypassed decades of international arms embargoes. They sidestepped the massive, heavily monitored military-industrial complex entirely. Instead, they turned global consumer capitalism into their own personal, unstoppable supply armory. We built the global free market, and they used it to assemble a fleet of flying bombs. We are not fighting a traditional military apparatus. We are fighting a hyper-violent hardware startup. This drone is just a symptom, a fatal amalgamation of consumer goods. But finding the parts is only the first step. To stop the swarm, we have to understand how a $20 microchip travels from an online shopping cart to an underground factory in the Zagros Mountains. The real war is hidden in the shipping lanes. The real war is indeed hidden in the shipping lanes, buried beneath millions of tons of legitimate global commerce. Knowing these drone components are entirely commercial, we must now hunt the invisible global network that funnels them directly into those Zagros mountain tunnels. I'm watching the targeting analyst frantically draw digital lines across a high-resolution map of the Eastern Hemisphere. The screens in this windowless bunker are bleeding red with suspicious shipping routes. It is a spiderweb of evasion, and the clock is relentlessly ticking. Every blink of a cursor represents another payload of microchips moving closer to the assembly line. The analyst zooms in on a shell company registered in Hong Kong, connecting it to a rusted cargo freighter currently navigating the Caspian Sea. The sheer scale of this logistical puzzle induces a dizzying paranoia. How do you stop a weapon when its parts arrive disguised as simple washing machine processors? You cannot just bomb a commercial port. You are looking at the ultimate ghost fleet, a distributed mechanism designed to exploit the very openness of our global economy. At major international ports, automated customs algorithms scan millions of cargo manifests every single day. But these algorithms are mathematically incapable of flagging a shipment of 5,000 commercial voltage regulators as a weapon of mass destruction. To the computer, it is just spare parts for appliances. There is no uranium signature. There is no radioactive decay to track. A voltage regulator destined for a microwave oven looks exactly like a voltage regulator destined for a loitering munition. The adversary knows this blind spot exists and actively weaponizes it. They exploit the sheer volume of global trade, hiding the apocalypse in plain sight inside standard shipping containers. To crack this open, the analyst has to look beyond the manifest and trace the bloodline of the money. This shadow supply chain utilizes a sophisticated technique known as layering. The procurement process never travels in a straight line. Instead, the critical components are purchased by obscure front companies established in neutral jurisdictions. A buyer in a seemingly harmless nation places the initial bulk order. Once the cargo clears the first hurdle, it is immediately rerouted, shipped through 3 or 4 different intermediary countries to deliberately scramble the paper trail. By the time a crate of microprocessors reaches its 3rd transit hub, the original bill of lading is completely buried under layers of fresh corporate fiction. The analyst points to a series of transactions bouncing from East Asia through the Middle East and finally toward the Eurasian landmass. It is a calculated shell game played on a planetary scale. The destination keeps shifting, making it nearly impossible for international customs enforcement to freeze the shipment in time. But moving physical boxes requires moving digital wealth. If you cannot track the steal, you follow the money. Yet this is where the traditional intelligence playbook burns to ash. These illicit logistical networks have entirely abandoned conventional banking infrastructure. Financial transactions for these shadow networks are increasingly settled using decentralized cryptocurrency mixers. They bounce the digital funds through thousands of anonymous wallets in a matter of seconds. When the blockchain is too risky, they revert to something much older and far more impenetrable. They utilize ancient Hawala trust networks. Millions of dollars are transferred across borders based entirely on honor and handwritten ledgers kept by local brokers. This dual-pronged financial strategy leaves absolute zero trace on the standard SWIFT banking system. The money moves invisibly, flowing right past the most stringent economic sanctions the Western world has ever engineered. So, the money is a ghost, and the paperwork is a lie. The only remaining vulnerability is the final physical delivery into the operational theater. The analyst drags the map over to the Caspian Sea, a massive inland body of water serving as the ultimate blind spot. Vessels traversing this critical maritime corridor frequently employ dark fleet tactics. They deliberately switch off their automatic identification system transponders, dropping completely off the global surveillance grid. Without their beacons pulsing, these massive cargo ships become black holes on the radar. Under the cover of total darkness, they rendezvous in international waters. We are watching satellite thermal imaging capture the ghostly heat signatures of two vessels drifting side by side. Right there, in the dead of night, they execute ship-to-ship transfers. They offload thousands of pounds of high-tech electronics using heavy cranes, completing the smuggling operation in absolute silence. By morning, the receiving ship powers its transponder back on, broadcasting a falsified route history as it docks at a friendly port. From there, the cargo is loaded onto unmarked transport trucks and driven straight into the gaping maws of the Zagros Mountains. The cycle is complete. A $20 microchip has survived a 10,000-mile journey through the very economic system designed to restrict it. The sheer audacity of this logistical pipeline is staggering to witness. We are watching a decentralized, highly motivated insurgency outmaneuver the most complex regulatory apparatus in human history. They are not breaking our laws. They are weaponizing our loopholes. Every cargo ship that slips through the net brings another swarm of lethal drones to life. The analyst slumps back in the chair, eyes bloodshot, watching the red lines converge on the mountain stronghold. The realization hits with the force of a physical blow. We cannot starve the factory. The materials will keep flowing, the assembly lines will keep humming, and the skies will keep filling with cheap, autonomous killers. The Shadow Logistics Cartel has successfully solved the equation of infinite supply. The underground assembly lines are fully stocked, and the weapons are being primed for launch. We have tracked the Ghost Fleet to its final destination, but the true nightmare is what happens when those doors open and the swarm finally takes flight into the night sky. Once those smuggled parts are fully assembled deep within the mountain, they are launched not as individual weapons, but as a terrifying hive mind. I am crouched deep in a mud-walled trench on the front line, and the pitch-black night sky has just erupted into a blinding canopy of anti-aircraft fire. The air raid sirens are screaming, but they are entirely drowned out by a sound that vibrates the actual water in my canteen. It sounds like 30 industrial lawnmowers tearing through the atmosphere directly above our heads. Through my tactical visor, a digital overlay maps the airspace, revealing invisible algorithmic tethers connecting these flying bombs in real time. This is not a scattered barrage. We are trapped underneath a decentralized intelligence, a predatory network making lethal calculations faster than the defense batteries can physically reload. The terrifying reality of this new warfare is the brutal math of swarm logic. A single cheap drone slipping past the radar grid is a nuisance, but 50 drones communicating dynamically, adjusting their vectors on the fly, is an absolute extinction-level event for this airbase. The glowing red dots on my screen are not moving randomly. They are hunting us with a cold, synchronized precision that defies human reaction times. The operators in the command bunker are screaming into their headsets, desperately searching for targets. But the screens remain terrifyingly blank for far too long. These munitions approach using extreme terrain-hugging flight paths. They cruise at an altitude of barely 150 feet, hugging the jagged contours of the landscape and utilizing the physical curvature of the Earth to hide in deep radar shadows. By staying below the electronic horizon, they remain completely invisible to our multi-million-dollar early warning systems. We do not get minutes to prepare. We get a maximum of 20 seconds of warning before they strike. 20 seconds. That is not enough time to scramble jets. That is barely enough time to dive for cover before the first explosive payload detonates against the reinforced concrete bunkers. And even when our advanced Patriot systems finally lock on to the incoming targets, the swarm is already a step ahead. This modern saturation strike deliberately deploys unarmed kinematic decoys perfectly mixed in with the live warheads. The incoming wave is deliberately provoking our radar arrays, baiting the automated defense batteries into firing their highly expensive interceptors at entirely worthless fiberglass shapes. As the sky fills with blinding white flashes of intercepted decoys, the hive mind mathematically analyzes our radar emission spikes. It instantly calculates the exact coordinates of our primary interceptor sites. The swarm is literally learning our defensive layout in real time, mapping the blind spots created by our own panicked firing. It is an algorithmic parasite feeding off the data generated by our desperate survival tactics. The objective is not immediate destruction, but systematic exhaustion. The swarm is designed to rapidly empty the magazines of our primary air defense systems. We are watching our defensive shields collapse piece by piece as $3 million missiles are baited into destroying empty shells. Once the silos are dry, the trailing drones carrying the high-explosive payloads slip right through the newly created gaps in our defense grid. We are witnessing the utter defeat of traditional military supremacy through sheer algorithmic mass. If this realization of how easily open-source code can dismantle an empire blows your mind as much as it does mine, hit the like button right now. Subscribe to the channel to uncover the rest of this hidden war. And tell me in the comments below, do you think any static defense system stands a chance against a learning swarm? The immediate counter-tactic in the trench is to flood the electromagnetic spectrum. Electronic warfare operators blast the sky with massive bursts of radio frequency jamming, hoping to sever the connection between the drones and their human pilots. But nothing happens. The swarm does not falter. These machines do not rely on a central, remote pilot sitting thousands of miles away in a safe, air-conditioned command center. Their entire attack vector is fully pre-programmed directly into their onboard microprocessors before they ever leave the mountain. When our jamming frequencies hit them, severing their external data links, they do not crash. They seamlessly switch to their internal inertial navigation backup systems. Traditional radio frequency interference is rendered entirely useless against an enemy that simply stops listening to the outside world. By relying strictly on internal gyroscopes and preloaded topographical data, the swarm becomes a closed loop of lethal physics. They calculate their current position strictly based on velocity, time, and gravity. You cannot hack a system that refuses to communicate. You are left trying to physically shoot down a barrage of flying artillery shells that know exactly where they are going, even when flying completely blind. Another deafening explosion rocks the ground, showering our trench in a heavy spray of dirt and fragmented concrete. The acrid smell of burning aviation fuel is suffocating. I'm watching seasoned combat veterans stare up at the sky with a creeping sense of absolute helplessness. The weapons they trained to fight were human-driven, constrained by fear, fatigue, and the need for communication. This enemy feels absolutely nothing. The digital overlay on my visor shows the swarm reconfiguring its formation. The decoys have successfully exhausted our outer battery, and now the live warheads are diving toward the secondary fuel depots. The algorithmic coordination is so fluid, so brutally efficient. It resembles a school of predatory fish cornering its prey. We are not just losing a battle. We are being mathematically dismantled by an optimized script of death. The kinetic fight is over. We simply do not have enough bullets left in the sky. If we are going to survive the next 10 minutes, we must shift tactics immediately. We have to move beyond just trying to jam their signals with raw noise. We have to fundamentally lie to their internal sensors. The only option remaining is to hack the invisible battlefield itself and trick the hive mind into diving directly into the dirt. With kinetic weapons completely exhausted, our defense must immediately transition to the invisible battlefield of electronic warfare. Inside this mobile command center, the air is thick with the smell of sweat and the deafening hum of massive diesel generators. An operator stares intensely at a glowing spectrum analyzer screen, violently twisting dials as he attempts to inject a false code into the incoming swarm. We are out of missiles, which means we are forced to shoot down this flying artillery with pure math. This is the realm of the phantom signal. If you cannot physically destroy the hardware, your only option is to corrupt the software guiding it. The goal is to aggressively hijack the navigation feed, feeding the swarm a highly calibrated digital hallucination that leads it away from the base. These frontline electronic warfare units are executing targeted GPS spoofing. The operator transmits a counterfeit satellite signal, mathematically engineered to be just slightly stronger than the real orbital transmission. The objective is to seamlessly overpower the genuine feed and trick the drone's logic board into initiating a steep dive directly into an empty, unpopulated field. For a brief, agonizing second, the red dots creeping across the tactical monitor actually stutter. The digital hallucination seems to be taking hold, pulling the swarm off its pre-programmed axis. We hold our breath, waiting for the altitude numbers to drop into the dirt. But the celebration dies in our throats. The anomaly corrects itself, and the machines abruptly resume their deadly trajectory. This is the most terrifying reality of the new asymmetric war. What do you do when the machine simply stops listening to your lies? The adversary anticipated this exact electronic countermeasure. By late 2025, the cartels operating out of the Zagros Mountains pushed a critical hardware update to the flight controllers of every single loitering munition leaving the assembly line. The drones were upgraded with anti-jamming CRPA, or Controlled Reception Pattern Antennas. This is not a complex mechanical shield, but a ruthless algorithmic filter. When the antenna detects a highly amplified, counterfeit signal blasting from the ground, it does not try to fight it. It simply isolates the corrupted directional input and mathematically nullifies the interference entirely. The operator slams his fist on the console. He is pumping maximum wattage into the jamming array, practically melting the transmitter. But the swarm ignores the noise. The controlled reception pattern antenna acts like a digital scalpel, carving out our spoofing attempts and discarding them as invalid data. We are screaming at a machine that has selectively muted our frequency. As we discovered during the initial saturation strike, these machines possess a devastating fallback mechanism. Even in the rare instances where our counterfeit GPS signal successfully penetrates the antenna filter, the weapon does not fail. The central processor simply detects the anomaly, severs its external connection, and instantly defaults to that onboard inertial measurement unit. We already know that this sealed gyroscope allows the drone to navigate without radio frequencies, but witnessing it defeat a targeted spoofing attack is entirely different. Once activated, it calculates its physical position strictly based on initial velocity, gravity, and time elapsed. The drone completely isolates itself, becoming a self-contained, impenetrable universe of mathematics. The machine essentially closes its eyes, deafens its ears, and runs on pure internal physics. It is flying totally blind, yet its trajectory remains terrifyingly true. You cannot spoof a sensor that takes no inputs. You cannot hack a network that does not exist. The operator leans back in his chair, staring at the screen in absolute defeat as the swarm crosses the final defensive perimeter. For the final 10 miles of its terminal flight path, the loitering munition becomes completely immune to all external electronic manipulation. It is no longer a smart weapon. It is a dumb, unstoppable kinetic projectile executing a relentless physical equation. The multi-million-dollar electronic warfare suite inside this command center is reduced to a useless box of blinking lights. The heavy thud of the first impact shakes the bunker walls, dusting the server racks with concrete powder. We failed to hack the invisible battlefield because the enemy designed a weapon that simply removes itself from the network when threatened. The sheer, brutal simplicity of an isolated gyroscope just defeated the most sophisticated spectrum analyzers on the entire planet. As the secondary explosions illuminate the night sky through the bunker blast doors, a much darker realization sets in. This resilient, jam-proof architecture is no longer confined to that single mountain range. If a $40,000 drone can mathematically shrug off our best electronic defenses here, it means the blueprint for absolute destruction has already been exported. The blueprint for absolute destruction has already escaped the Zagros Mountains. Inside the intelligence bunker, the adrenaline feels exactly like a frontline trench. I watch the analyst furiously clicking through fresh satellite imagery. The screen is a strobe light of new coordinates, flashing far beyond the borders of the Middle East. We are no longer hunting a single, isolated threat. The success of the drones has triggered a terrifying new phase of this conflict. We are witnessing the rapid, uncontrolled export of the entire manufacturing process itself. The map on the main monitor is beginning to bleed red. A massive new factory complex materializes on the screen, situated deep in the desolate expanse of the Russian steppes. This is not a temporary outpost or a makeshift assembly garage. Intelligence confirmed that by late 2024, The core intellectual property required to build these loitering munitions was officially sold and transferred. The enemy did not just export the weapon, they exported the entire genetic code of the apocalypse. The analyst zooms in on the sprawling industrial footprint, revealing specialized tooling arrays and dedicated power grids. They are establishing massive franchise factories thousands of miles away from the original Zagros mountain tunnels. It operates exactly like a fast food chain, but instead of burgers, they are mass-producing autonomous flying bombs. The coordinates lock onto the Alabuga Special Economic Zone. The sheer scale of this single new facility is suffocating. Satellite thermal signatures indicate continuous, round-the-clock manufacturing operations inside these massive, heavily fortified hangars. We are watching the industrialization of asymmetric warfare happening in real time. This specific Alabuga site was meticulously designed to produce over 6,000 units per single year. Let that sheer volume sink in. That catastrophic production rate completely eclipses the original manufacturing capacity of those deep underground tunnels we were hunting just a few days ago. The swarm is multiplying faster than we can track it. This reveals the most dangerous truth about the Zagros facility. The ultimate threat was never just the weapons rolling off its hidden assembly lines. The true nightmare is that the mountain provided a flawless, replicable blueprint for the rest of the world. The technology is completely out of the bottle, and no embargo can put it back. This rapid technology transfer marks a brutal paradigm shift. We are looking at the absolute democratization of strategic bombing. You no longer need $1 trillion defense budget or decades of aerospace research to level a city block. The capability to inflict catastrophic damage from the sky is now available for the price of a mid-sized corporate acquisition. Look closely at the secondary thermal blooms popping up across the Middle Eastern desert. Non-state actors, rogue factions, and proxy militias now possess highly accurate, long-range precision strike capabilities. Just a decade ago, this exact level of destructive power was exclusively held by established nuclear superpowers. Now, it is terrifyingly commonplace. The analyst pulls up the intercepted shipping manifests for these new sites. The ghost fleets and dark vessels we tracked earlier are becoming obsolete. The supply chain has entirely localized. These new franchise factories no longer need to import complete engines or risk their shipments being seized on the open ocean by international customs patrols. Instead of waiting for smuggled parts, they are utilizing advanced three-dimensional metal printing and localized computer numerical control milling to manufacture the critical components directly on site. They are turning digital blueprints into physical engines without ever crossing a contested border. The invisible logistics network has retreated safely inside the factory walls. When a factory can print its own engine blocks and mill its own chassis frames, traditional sanctions become completely mathematically useless. You cannot blockade a digital file. The analyst taps the glass of the monitor, pointing to the raw material stockpiles. As long as they have electricity and raw aluminum, the deadly swarm will simply continue to grow. This localized autonomy means the countdown timer to a global crisis is accelerating. We are facing a decentralized network of autonomous death factories, immune to both physical bunker busters and international trade embargoes. The front line is no longer a specific geographic coordinate. It is any place on Earth with a milling machine and an internet connection. From this windowless bunker, the cold blue glow of the screens offers no comfort. The analyst knows that every new thermal signature represents hundreds of uninterceptable drones entering the global theater. We spent decades preparing for a centralized superpower clash, completely ignoring the decentralized, open-source plague that is currently rewriting the rules of combat. You have to understand the sheer velocity of this threat. A weapon system that took superpowers half a century to perfect was reverse-engineered, optimized, and franchised globally in less than 3 years. The proliferation is moving at the speed of a digital virus, infecting industrial zones from the freezing Russian steppes to the scorching desert sands. The most terrifying part of watching these satellite feeds is the absolute helplessness. We can map every single air duct and loading bay of the Alabuga complex, but we cannot legally or physically drop a bomb on it. The enemy has weaponized global geography and international law, building their arsenals in sanctuaries we are terrified to strike. The map is fully saturated now, covered in a web of undeniable red threat indicators. The anomaly we discovered in the Zagros Mountains has mutated into a global pandemic of cheap, autonomous lethality. The multi-billion-dollar defense shields of the West are about to face a mathematical volume of incoming fire they were never designed to survive. The map has bled red, and the algorithms of deterrence have officially failed. I am sitting in the dirt of a shattered trench line, covered in the pulverized concrete of yesterday's architecture, watching the sun rise over a transformed Earth. The cold blue glow of the bunker screens has been replaced by the pale morning light, illuminating a reality we spent the last 80 years desperately trying to avoid. The localized autonomy we feared is now simply the global standard. In my hands, a cracked tablet screen displays a live feed of a $10 billion aircraft carrier group floating in the Persian Gulf. For a century, that steel behemoth was the ultimate symbol of global hegemony, the undisputed apex predator of the oceans. But sitting here in the dust, watching those massive ships idle on the digital display, they no longer look like power. They look painfully slow, incredibly large, and utterly vulnerable. We have spent our entire lives building these invincible steel giants, engineering monuments to human arrogance, only to find ourselves being devoured by a relentless swarm of fiberglass ants. My time in the dirt is over, but this is exactly where your understanding must begin. The camera of history is pulling back, and what we are seeing is the undisputed death of the platform-centric warfare model that defined the 20th century. Think back to the charred crater where this investigation started, and the sheer economic absurdity of trading a $3 million interceptor for a $30,000 target. That was never just a glitch in the supply chain. The Zagros anomaly was a violent proof of concept, demonstrating that deep underground logistics, combined with cheap, autonomous mass, can mathematically overwhelm the most sophisticated conventional militaries on the planet. We arrogantly believed that the barrier to entry for strategic destruction was guarded by nuclear physics and classified laboratories. Instead, the apocalypse was reverse-engineered using $20 microprocessors and cloned model airplane engines bought on global e-commerce platforms. We armed our own adversaries with the very consumer technology that built our modern digital utopia, turning the global capitalist supply chain into a decentralized weapon. And when we tried to track this infection, we found ourselves hunting a ghost fleet. The components moved through dark waters, obscured by decentralized cryptocurrency mixers and midnight ship-to-ship transfers. We built our defense systems to track ballistic trajectories and massive thermal blooms, entirely missing the lethal arithmetic of 1,000 civilian cargo ships carrying commercial voltage regulators. The math of our security was completely blinded by volume. When those commercial parts finally took to the sky, They did not attack as isolated machines, but as a calculated hive mind. We watched multi-million-dollar Patriot batteries exhaust their magazines in minutes, completely overwhelmed by kinematic decoys and terrain-hugging flight paths. And when we tried to blind them with electronic warfare, they simply closed their digital eyes, relying on pure onboard physics to strike with terrifying, inertial precision. The illusion of technological supremacy has been permanently shattered. The algorithm of national survival has fundamentally changed overnight. Victory in this new epoch no longer belongs to the nation with the most advanced, exquisite technology, hiding behind fifth-generation fighter jets. It belongs entirely to the society that can manufacture and deploy acceptable lethality at the absolute lowest possible cost. We have entered the era of the disposable apocalypse. You are now living in a world where the sky is permanently contested territory, a domain no longer monopolized by superpowers, but accessible to any proxy militia with a computer numerical control milling machine. The protective barrier of oceans and borders has evaporated. The democratization of precision aerial strike capabilities means that the front line is no longer a geographical coordinate you can avoid. It is hovering directly over your own neighborhood. This is the bitter truth of asymmetric warfare that John von Neumann and the pioneers of game theory could never have simulated. We designed our entire civilization around the premise that massive capital investment guarantees absolute security. But a $40,000 drone does not care about your gross domestic product. It operates on the cold, unforgiving logic of attrition, bleeding empires dry, one cheap fiberglass wing at a time. Looking at the vast, empty sky above this trench, the terrifying reality is that this technology is still in its infancy. We are standing on the precipice of a fully autonomous future, where artificial intelligence will optimize these swarms beyond human comprehension. The factories replicating across the globe right now are not just building weapons. They are assembling a distributed, open-source intelligence that will soon dictate the terms of human survival. If this investigation has fundamentally changed how you view the geopolitical chessboard, then hit the like button so we know this analysis is piercing the noise. But more importantly, we need you to subscribe to the channel, not just to catch the next documentary, but to actively continue this critical research with us. Drop your conclusions in the comments, because understanding the mathematics of this new reality is the only way we stand a chance of surviving it. The era of the undisputed superpower is buried under the pulverized limestone of the Zagros Mountains. We must look up from our screens and recognize that the parameters of safety have been permanently rewritten. The multi-billion-dollar defense shields of the West are mathematically obsolete, bypassed by a revolution that started in the commercial toy aisle and ended in the destruction of our most sacred military dogmas. The era of comfortable dominance is over. The ticking clock of the next global conflict will not be measured by the grand launch of intercontinental ballistic missiles, but by the silent, terrifying hum of 1 million commercial processors waking up in the dark. We are entirely exposed, standing beneath a sky that belongs to the swarm. Prepare yourselves for the dark arithmetic of tomorrow. I am your forward embedded correspondent, and this investigation is closed. Signing off.